Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined by the suddenly clean-shaven Weston Hodkowitz. And we're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field, unfortunately, to recap a season-ending NFC Wildcard playoff loss. The final was 22-10 at Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia. And Wes, if there's anything that is going to be the recurring theme of the downfall of the 2024 Green Bay Packers, it's that when they had a really, really big game to play, they didn't start it well enough to be able to win it.
This is the hardest part for me as you and I were coming back on the plane and obviously writing our content and everything that followed these last couple days is there were so many things we talked about going into this game, and the Packers knew it too, that had to get accomplished. And realistically, they didn't achieve any of them. I was talking to my father after I got home from the game. Sometimes the old father-son talk, you kind of debrief about work. And
I do it via text message with my dad.
Your dad's down in Platteville. Mine lives 2 miles away from me, so it's easy.
Yeah.
But like I said, I was like, that was the most disappointing part of this game for me is nothing surprising happened relative to what you knew the worst case scenario could be.
Yeah.
It was an early turnover on the kickoff. It was losing the turnover margin 4-0 for the game, not being able to get off to a fast start, offensively struggling to find a rhythm. And Mike, one of the things we talked about last week, if Philadelphia was going to lock it down and take care of and remove the threat of Josh Jacobs so early on, the Packers had to take advantage. Well, the Eagles, which had a very respectable run defense, not number one ranked like their past defense, but top 10. Well, they were able to contain him with a light box. They kept the shell on the top of the defense. And as Jaden Reed talked about after the game, the Packers had to kind of play underneath that. And when that's the case, you have to find ways to create explosive plays. You got to make guys miss. You have to get in the open field. And Green Bay just struggled to do that. And their season ended because of it. It's very strange footing for me, Mike. This is the first time in my time with the Green Bay Packers in which they've made the playoffs and have not been in the divisional round, whether it was as a bye or whether they played into it. This is the first time the Packers have lost in the wild card round since 2015, my last year at the Press-Gazette. So there's just this feeling all week long of not like whatever the antithesis of like finality would be. It's just inconclusive. It just feels like, as you wrote about in some of our stories this week, we never really saw the Packers play their best ball. They won 11 games, and now they're off into the offseason once again.
Yeah, it's certainly frustrating, and Matt LaFleur talked about it. His season-ending news conference was shortly before we turned the cameras on here. Talked about just how disappointing it was for the offense to hit the skids at the end of the season. And everybody's questioning, okay, what went wrong and everything. And I don't, I'm one who tries to look at it from a big picture perspective. I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with the Packers offense. You have to realize that before things started to go south in Minnesota in the second to last regular season game, the Packers had scored 30-plus points 5 games in a row. That's what makes the finish, the Minnesota game, the Chicago game, and then the Philadelphia game, that's what makes it so head-scratching and so surprising. I mean, yes, the end result in Philadelphia was not surprising based on what had happened in Minnesota and leading up to it. The Packers didn't have momentum. They had the toughest playoff position as the 7th seed. They were not healthy. They were getting some guys back on defense, but guys were dropping like flies during the game and all that. There's so much to try to process there. But offensively, I mean, you said it. The Eagles were able to contain Josh Jacobs to basically 2.5 to 3 yards a carry. I mean, he had right around 50 yards on 17 of his carries. He had the one that busted a tremendous run down to the 1 yard line, set up the touchdown run there on the opening play of the fourth quarter. But the Packers couldn't get Jacobs going. So then the Eagles were still able to sit back, make the Packers try to run the quick game on offense. And as I was saying in the live blog during the game, if you're trying to just continue to throw the quick outs to get the ball out of Love's hand, because anytime there were developing routes, there was a guy in his face, and he's having to bail the pocket. There was no timing. There was no rhythm to anything. If all you can do is throw the quick stuff, well, then the defense is going to eventually sit on that, and they're going to jump it, and they're going to make a play on that. So you still have to try to mix in everything else. But when everything else was being mixed in, there was no rhythm. There was no consistency to anything going on offense. And this offense really just ended the season in just a 3-week malaise of poor execution and poor results.
And I'm going to pull Dom Capers here for one moment. Just say I'm going to start with the positives first in this, and then I'll bring it back to what you were talking about. Everything that we saw and everything we believed in Josh Jacobs, I felt like was epitomized in this game. I think you can make a case Josh Jacobs was maybe the MVP of this entire roster this season.
I think he was.
And the way he performed and his consistency, when you're talking about guys that showed up every single week and did it at a high level, he made a few mistakes, but as we saw, if you look at the guys that have had 300-plus carries in Packers history, I think he had 4 fumbles on the season. That's right around the lowest. I think Edgar Bennett had 2 one year. But, Amon Green had 7, had 8. For how many times he touched the ball, I thought Josh Jacobs did a really good job with it. If Green Bay was going to have a chance in this thing, the way he ran, particularly in the second half, which had been the strong point of the offense this year, and the way he was able to get some of the passing game stuff going, he gave a speech to the guys beforehand and saying, if you don't feel like you can do it, follow me. I'm going to lead this thing. How driven he was to maximize this opportunity. Josh Jacobs helped get the Packers to 11 wins. He helped get them to the playoffs. And any chance they had of winning this game, I think, followed number 8. To bring it back to what you're talking about, though, the synergy of the offense just has not been there the last 3 games.
Something's been out of sync between the link between the run and the pass. Whatever the case might be, you're right. Synergy is a great word because it's not there.
Why I'm struggling the most with this. I don't discount what Christian Watson means to this team. He is a big playmaker, but they played most of last season without him.
Right.
They missed Aaron Jones for just under half the season as well, and they found ways down the stretch. They weren't able to do that this year. And
you lost Elton Jenkins in this game too, but last year there was a lot of shuffling going on the offensive line, and they were still figuring it out. I mean, losing Jenkins in a playoff game, enormous, because he had to be replaced by guys who basically hadn't played.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. But again, we're kind of scratching our heads here as to exactly what the downfall was.
Yeah, in National Football League, by the way, if you want to take out an offensive lineman, just run as quickly as you can with your helmet directly into his shoulder.
Yeah.
And Nolan Smith is going to get the job done. So the Packers that was a huge domino effect. Travis Glover goes in at left guard. Doesn't go great. Then Kadeem Telford has to come in. And as Josh Jacobs said afterwards, he actually told Telford afterwards, he's like, I'm really proud of you. I mean, Glover hadn't played on offense at all. Telford had maybe like 15 snaps or something like that before that game. A bad situation to be in. And by the way, any Packer fans out there that took issue with them drafting Jordan Morgan in the first round, you saw why Jordan Morgan was going to be a first-round pick and why they wanted him. Credit to Telford, credit to Glover. You give those guys all the respect in the world for what they do and what they're going through to be in that position. But the Green Bay Packers, with how strong they were and how durable they were on the offensive line this year, you kind of forget that they don't necessarily have that Evan Smith, on the 6th guy. They don't necessarily have a guy that you can turn to as that next guy up that has experience and also has some credentials.
They lost him. They lost that 6th man when Jordan Morgan went on injured reserve, because whether it was going to be Morgan or Sean Ryan ultimately as the full-time starter at guard before the shoulder injury cropped up again, you were going to have a 6th man there that was going to put your offensive line in a different situation.
And they obviously signed Andre Dillard, but Dillard was working his way back to the
That's the other part too, and he was inactive for this game. He'd been on the injury list trying to come back from a concussion for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, so
it was a bad combination of things, and losing Elton Jenkins, especially early in the game like that. And then the receivers go down like later on. Hey, the Eagles dealt with injuries too. They lost Nakobe Dean. They're going to be trying to get to a Super Bowl without one of their better defensive players. Hey, it happens. But when you're the 7th seed on the road playing in Philadelphia, those are the kinds of things that add to the mistakes you were already making, and the mistakes were being made on offense and special teams.
And not to keep bringing up the 15 playoff game here, but there were so many parallels between that with how banged up they were at receiver going in, where you already lost Christian Watson, much like they didn't have Devontae in that 15 playoff game. You're down to 3 receivers that you're finishing that game with.
Right.
Musgrave is still working his way back at the tight end position. Ben Sims was down. So they were up against it. And in credit to Philadelphia, I thought every single time, other than that first quarter, where Green Bay got some stops to help them mitigate some of the damage there early on and get through those early interceptions from Love, when Green Bay started to score, Philadelphia matched it every time in the second half. And that's ultimately why they won the football game.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it came down to. The Packers defense held tough, held really, really strong. The fact that it was only 10-0 at halftime was an impressive showing by the defense. Obviously, the opening touchdown because of the fumble on the opening kickoff. We'll get back to that in a minute. But the defense had a stretch there from after that first possession with the short field through the opening possession of the second half. That was 6 drives for the Eagles, 5 punts and a field goal against a team that was 14-3 in the regular season and got its starting quarterback back for this game. That was a winning performance from the defense. Unfortunately, the way things unfolded is then once the Packers did get on the board, they got it to 10-3, but then the defense wasn't able to get it back to the offense with just a 1-score deficit.
Yeah.
It becomes 16-3. Then the Packers score. Jacobs has the big run down on the 1-yard line. Packers score, get it to 16-10. But then the defense was not able to get the ball back to the offense with the 1-score deficit. Jordan Love, when the offense finally was starting to find something, Jordan Love didn't have the ball in his hands, just needing 1 score to either even up the game or potentially take the lead. That just never happened, and that's why you can't start as poorly as the Packers did. You cannot put up a goose egg in the first half on the scoreboard in a playoff game. And yeah, I mean, if you had told me at the start of the fourth quarter that the Philadelphia Eagles were going to have 16 points on the board, I would have said the Packers are winning the game and going to Detroit. You would take that in a heartbeat 99 times out of 100.
My whole thing all week, and you had to hear me say this, was I thought it was going to be the first to 30 wins.
Yeah, and I totally agreed with you on that.
These two teams barely got to 30 together.
Yeah.
Like, it turned into something, and that's respect to Fangio's defense, that's respect to Jeff Hafley's defense. I'm not discounting that. Both of those are top 5 defenses. Fangio's was the best in the National Football League from a yardage perspective. But I just felt like, based on what we saw in Brazil, it was going to follow that track. A.J. Brown had 1 catch for 10 yards, right? Saquon Barkley did what he always did, although he didn't get the huge explosive this time. He just did it kind of wearing down the offense or the defensive line. But I'll tell you what, Mike, for me, I don't know how many people out in Philadelphia wrote about this, but Dallas Goedert was the MVP of this game for me. Because when you talk about veteran players that step up and a guy that had to deal with some big injuries this year, he was sort of the safety valve that finally got Jalen Hurts going.
Yeah.
In addition to his touchdown, where, again, we can have that conversation about being, offensive players doing the illegal hands of the face thing, and that's fine. But whatever the case may be, he's the one that kind of got them going there in the second half, and obviously 131 passing yards for Jalen Hurts was enough to win this game.
Yeah, I mean and at the end of the day, the Eagles had a couple penalties, some things that set them back like here and there, but ultimately the Eagles didn't make a big mistake.
They didn't make a huge mistake.
They played, for the most part, they played error-free football. I mean, to the extent that the Packers had made so many mistakes early with the fumble on the opening kickoff, the 2 interceptions in the first half, that there were 2 instances on 3rd and long where they just handed it off to Barkley because they're like, we're not going to put our quarterback in a bad situation. The Packers have made enough mistakes to give the Eagles the lead, and the Eagles are just going to be like, okay, we're not going to try to do something crazy on 3rd and long. We'll hand it off to Barkley. Maybe he breaks it. If he doesn't, we'll punt the football because we're not going to make the kind of mistake that can change the game. That's the way they were playing because of how the Packers started. And we'll get to that start right now, because if there is a big fat what if about this football game, and I hate playing this game, the what if game, because we talked about the injury to Jenkins and the Packers losing their receivers and all this other stuff. The biggest what if that's hanging over this game is what if the replay review gives the ball back to the Packers on the opening kickoff, because everybody saw it. I mean, however many millions of people are watching this game on TV, it sure looked like the sky cam showed that Keyshawn Nixon had recovered that ball, and then it got ripped away from him later on, like down under the pile. And Nixon even said, basically, he felt like it was two guys, one on each side of him, that were ripping his arms apart, so that the ball then came out again, and the Eagles came out of the pile with the ball. They reviewed it. They said the call stands. So obviously in their mind, it wasn't conclusive enough that Nixon had recovered the ball and secured the recovery. The question we were talking about before we turned the cameras on is, there are these things floating around out there, is did the replay center in New York actually have access to the overhead camera, or did it only have the more traditional camera angles used to broadcast the game? If New York didn't have access to the overhead camera, I totally understand the call that they made. But if that is true, and I'm not saying that it is, I don't know that it is, it's just sort of something that we're hearing. But if that is true, I don't understand that at all. And if it isn't true, and if they did have the look at the overhead camera, I don't understand how you can say Keyshawn Nixon didn't have that ball on the ground and he's clearly down by contact.
I've just gone back and forth over this in my head, and because the first and foremost, like, I would love to sit here and say, okay, well, all this is mitigated if you hold on to the football.
Right.
Oren Burks also threw his helmet directly into Keyshawn's face mask, which
Correct.
Also shouldn't be happening. Whether it should be penalized, I assume Oren will be fined for that, I think. But whatever the case may be, Keyshawn's human. Like, I understand why that happens. A helmet to helmet, helmet to face mask hit is going to have repercussions to it. NFL officiating has its challenges, and I'm trying to be more understanding of what the humans on the field are going through and what they're dealing with in the moment. Everything surrounding NFL officiating is so antiquated. It is so antiquated.
Yep.
Everything evolves with this game. The players evolve. The technology evolves. We listened to Matt LaFleur talk for 38 minutes today. Some of the stuff he's mentioning, how he goes back to his analytics department to see, hey, how are we doing with shotgun play action? How are we doing with stuff under center? They gave him the percentages where they rank in the National Football League. And yet you have the most popular sport in the world that's being disseminated to the entire country and in part, basically every part of the world sees these sky cam shots, and Brad Allen and his crew, it's a scrum. I understand, human element, but they missed it. They missed Oren. They missed the fumble recovery, and New York stops the game, looks at it, evidently gets a high C, scratches its head a little bit and says, no, play stands.
Yeah.
And then moments later, it's 7-0 Eagles. I say it every year, Mike. I said it 2 weeks ago as it related to another game in the National Football League. There's always going to be these plays that happen in the playoffs that change the outcome. I'm not saying the Packers win that game.
Right. I'm not saying
Packers did not play well.
That's why I termed it as, it's the big what if of this football game, is if that turnover on the opening kickoff is not a turnover. That's the what if that we'll never know the answer to.
And there's a number of games left to be played yet. There's going to be another officiating thing. We have all this garbage of this replay assist stuff that is at times utilized and at times not utilized and at times makes no sense. But yet you have an instance like that where you have technology showing what's happening on the play. And not even like the stuff that happened with Edger and Cooper a couple weeks ago where it's like you're looking, is the dress gold or is it blue? Where is he offsides? Is he not offsides? No, you legitimately see Keyshawn with the ball in his hand. And if New York doesn't have that technology, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Why are we playing this game?
Right. And my larger problem, as many know what I've said about the safety rules and replay review and everything like that, if the NFL is looking at that replay and and they deem, because I will confess, I don't know all the rules as far as the helmet hits and whether a guy supposedly needs to be launching himself, in certain situations or whatever the case may be. I don't know all the helmet to helmet rules, but if the NFL is looking at that, and if that helmet to helmet shot by Burks on Nixon is something that is going to generate a fine for Oren Burks, and all that the replay did was decide nothing because they couldn't figure out apparently who had the ball under the scrum, and Oren Burks is going to get a FedEx in his locker with a $15,000 fine for a helmet hit, and that's a play that started a playoff game and handed a 7-0 lead, or it would have been a minimum 3-0 lead even if the Packers defense rises up there. What are we doing here? I mean,
well, we're making money is what we're doing.
Yeah, that's exactly what the league is doing. But what I am most frustrated with, and it comes to obviously a bigger spotlight in the playoff games, but just this, what the NFL is passing off, what needs to be accepted with regard to these safety rules, is that some are going to get flagged in the game, but then we're going to review them and they're not going to get fined. Mm-hmm. And then some are not going to be flagged in the game, and then they're going to be fined, and the players are going to get money taken out of their pocketbook. But these are just the results that everybody has to accept.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's gotten to the point of being unacceptable, especially when, if indeed that Oren Burks gets fined for that helmet shot, when it impacts a playoff game to the extent that this one did. Sorry, I'll get off the soapbox.
Excellent points all around. Let's say Oren doesn't get fined at all. The independent neurologist calls Keyshawn Nixon off the field to take a look.
Right.
Why did that happen? What technology did the independent neurologist have to see, hey, yeah, Keyshawn Nixon, we need to take a look at him. The Eagles player just drilled him in that helmet with his helmet. But yet we can't do anything about these things.
Right.
So, again, the National Football League, they want to make their cash. They want to get things going. The ad revenue is going to come in. The Super Bowl will be played. They're going to hand out the trophy again to somebody. But in terms of the X's and O's and what these people invest into this game, if there's stuff available to you to make it a cleaner, more palatable product, let's do that. Oh, and by the way, the other thing that absolutely needs to get thrown out the door this offseason would be amazing if they could do this. This stuff about if we see it, if it has to be all these things, but we'll flag it. We won't flag it, but we'll fine it, and that's how we're going to do it. This is stuff that led to Josh Jacobs having all those random fines.
And he spent the season appealing fines, and I won at least one appeal from thanks to some good reporting by Pete Doherty there that we found out about. But yeah, I mean, exactly. It just becomes a question of what are we doing here? All right. Some sponsor business here to give ourselves a break. SiriusXM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50-plus years of better. All right, other results around Wildcard Weekend. I want to start with the AFC because I want to give a shout-out to the Houston Texans.
A shout-out.
D'Amico Ryans and that defense brought it on Saturday afternoon. We talked, I think we mentioned on our last show how every time Houston has been in the playoffs, they've been in the Saturday 3:30, central kickoff of Wildcard Weekend.
Are they in it next weekend? Did we see?
Yes, they are actually. Yeah, Houston is. You're right. The Houston Kansas City game is once again Saturday at 3:30. But man, oh man, Houston, and this just goes to show that when you can rise up in the big moments and play your best football when it matters. What Houston did, a very up and down season, a very humbling loss late in the season to another playoff contender in the Baltimore Ravens. But boy, that defense gave Justin Herbert and the Chargers fits, and that game was not about C.J. Stroud or Joe Mixon at all. That game was all about Houston Texans and that D'Amico Ryans defense. And Kansas City is obviously a heavy favorite to go to the AFC Championship and beat Houston at Arrowhead, but I am very curious to see what Houston's defense does against a Kansas City offense that has never really been clicking on all cylinders this season.
No, not at all. And
it makes for a very intriguing matchup, and we can talk more about that in our next show as well.
Absolutely. I got to say, man, Justin Herbert had 4 interceptions. He had 3 during the regular season total.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
My crack colleague and our assistant director of communications, when we were watching this, Tom Fanning, I believe he told me that Justin Herbert had never had more than 2 interceptions in a game before. And he had 4 in this game. Derek Stingley, by the way, when you talk about the top cornerbacks in the league, I think it's probably time to... He got a first-team All-Pro honors, people respecting him, but like he's in that conversation now. He's lived up to his potential.
It needs to be said, not all 4 of those interceptions were Herbert's fault, though.
Correct.
His receivers were letting him down big time.
But I mean, it goes to the overall thing. I mean, they basically had, McConkey was the one guy that was kind of going for him. Kudos to J.K. Dobbins. I have so much respect for that dude. Coming back from the injuries he did, this season.
No doubt.
But the Chargers running game was non-existent. And it basically just became the Lad McConkey show, and it just was not a good recipe for success.
No.
For the formerly known as the San Diego Superchargers.
No, it was not. The other AFC games, I think, pretty much went as expected. I was surprised that Denver didn't put up a better fight in Buffalo. They score on the opening possession of the game, and then they didn't score the rest of the game, and Buffalo turns that one into a blowout. And the Pittsburgh Steelers just completely no-showed in the first half in Baltimore, down 21-0, and Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson ran all over him for whatever it was, 300 rushing yards or 299 or whatever the number was. On the NFC side, you got to give it up to the Cardiac Commanders, brother. 5 consecutive games now, 5 straight, 4 to end the regular season, first playoff game, and 7 overall if you include 2 games from earlier in the year. The Washington Commanders win a game on literally or pretty much effectively the last play of the football game. It is unbelievable the run that Dan Quinn and the Washington Commanders and Jaden Daniels and those guys are on. And this one is not just a walk-off field goal. It's a walk-off doink and in field goal to win on the road at Tampa Bay. And it's the Washington Commanders getting the shot at the Detroit Lions in the divisional round.
And fortunately for Zane Gonzalez, that thing went in, because otherwise him checking his hair 58 times and then doinking 37-yarder, you would have never lived that down. Listen, man, you and I, we've spent a lot of unscripteds when we're looking at the league talking about Jaden Daniels and just the enigma he's been this year. He's been a force, and he was a force in this game. Washington did not run the ball well. They needed Daniels to be the guy that he's been all season, and he stepped up. And when you talk about these comebacks late, the way he's performed in the fourth quarter, I don't know what his QBR quarterback rating is in those instances, but he's really stepped up for them.
There hasn't been, I can't remember a rookie quarterback who has appeared so completely unflappable in clutch situations in the fourth quarter, in overtime, whatever you want to call it, than what we've seen from Jaden Daniels. It is remarkable what he has done in crunch time of games.
Yeah, and Baker Mayfield played a fine game. It was one of those things where Matt LaFleur talks about this every once in a while, where it just comes down to possessions, and Washington never punted. So, I mean, when you're in those situations...
Yeah, Dan Quinn was going for it on fourth down on
every
multiple occasions.
Well, every time. And other than kicking field goals. So, a remarkable performance. To be honest with you, jealous-wise, that's kind of why I was like, oh, Packers, if you can get that 6th seed...
Yeah, exactly. That's
what could happen.
That's why the 6th seed matters. The difference between... It was the difference between playing a 10-win Buccaneers team and a 14-win Eagles team in the first round. That's the difference. That's why... It's why positioning matters. It's why momentum matters. It's why playing your best football, being healthy matters.
They're up against it, going up against Detroit in that offense, but with Commanders' offense, man, they can play with anybody. So I think Jaden Daniels, we can all agree at this point, is a guy that can put up the points if you need him to. So it's a fresh matchup.
Yes, Baker Mayfield, he's going to take into the offseason. As you said, he played a solid game, but the one botched handoff,
that was it.
That created
one mistake.
Created the short field for Washington to get a touchdown after they had failed on 4th and goal. Mm-hmm. They get the ball back right around the 20-yard line, whatever it was, and then they end up scoring the touchdown anyway, and that's a tough way certainly a tough way for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to go out. But
speaking of tough ways.
Yeah, speaking of tough ways to go out, we had talked about this. Sean McVay, I just went through the list. Positioning matters, momentum matters, being healthy, playing your best football matters, right? Sean McVay said positioning doesn't matter. He didn't care about whether he was the 3 or the 4 seed. He obviously felt that with the wins that his team had built up, that they had enough momentum, right? So he prioritized health. He prioritized his guys being rested and healthy over everything. And so he didn't care that he dropped to the 4 seed, or was it just the evil genius plan of Sean McVay, knowing that, well, if we get the 4 seed, you're going to get a team coming off of a devastating loss because of what would be at stake. Right? And a physically, wear you out type of football game. And yeah, the Vikings, you talk about the Packers, the way the offense hit the skids late. The Packers go from 11-4 with 2 games in the regular season to go to out of the playoffs after 1 postseason game 3 weeks later. The Vikings go from 14-2, playing for the number 1 seed and the bye and the home field advantage, to 8 quarters later, their season is over and they are out. That has to be one of the bigger kicks in the teeth that I have witnessed in terms of it happening the way it did to the Minnesota Vikings.
I don't want to change my tune because I congratulate Sam Darnold on everything he did this year. He deserves to be in the Pro Bowl. He played an unreal season.
He did.
But this game really spoke to the difference between, with respect, Sam Darnold and someone like Matthew Stafford, who has played this game for as long as he has. He's won a Super Bowl. And credit to the Rams for the way they made themselves, and credit to the Cardinals too, and everyone down in Arizona for how they made them feel at home in a very hard situation, a very emotional situation, something much bigger than football that's happening in LA, and how they had to really uproot themselves and go down and play this game. And they had the practice field they did in Rams colors, so credit to them on that.
There was a lot that was going on surrounding this game.
But boy, I tell you, man, I said this to you. I wrote it in inbox. The difference of having a healthy Stafford, a healthy Puka Nacua, a healthy Tyler Higbee, and then
who ended up getting hurt and leaving the game, but yeah.
Before that.
But no, he was a huge factor in the early portion.
And then Cooper Kupp makes one catch, and it was kind of a big one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, it's the way these things go. You can't make mistakes. The Vikings made way too many in the first half, and that was it.
Yeah. Here's a couple questions I want to throw at you, and then we'll wrap this up. With regard to the Vikings, is the lesson or the big picture thing when it comes to Sam Darnold that experience in really big games matters? Because where he had gone in his career and all the games that he had lost and all the struggles he had with the Jets and with the Panthers, how many truly big games had Sam Darnold played in, right? One of the biggest was he played a career game against the Green Bay Packers at US Bank Stadium. But then as the stakes got higher against Detroit, now that's on the road, obviously, and then against the Rams in sort of on the road / neutral site, Sam Darnold's inexperience in big games showed, and it showed big time.
Yeah.
And that leaves the Vikings with what we thought a couple weeks ago was a slam dunk decision in terms of their quarterback for next year. Now it's not such a slam dunk, is it?
No, and okay, so two things is the first part of that question, like I am just completely perplexed at what happened with Minnesota. I mean, the Rams defense was not a world beater this year.
No.
They ranked near the bottom of the league for most of the season. Now, credit to Sean McVay. Again, that's a sign of good coaching. They got him peaking at the end of the year. They got a little bit healthier as well. But, I mean, the amount of pressure they generated on Sam Darnold, whether it was the 4-man rushes, whether it was blitzes, I mean, like, they got after him, and he did not respond well to it. Here's where I'm really torn about what the decision now becomes with Darnold. And you can play back the Packers Unscripted of me saying, hey, absolutely have to sign him 13 days ago. But it's like, okay, Kevin O'Connell has built up enough positive vibes there. He's 34-17. They have not won a playoff game, but he has a 13-win season on his resume and a 14-win season on his resume.
Yeah.
If there was ever a time, if you want to invest into the young quarterback and you're going to get some grace, this is it. As opposed to, what is it going to cost to keep Sam Darnold? If Sam Darnold is going to be back for $20 million or even $30 million, I think like what Baker's playing for, you probably give it another go. But does he want a long-term contract? Are you going to put a franchise tag on him? Like, these are the type of decisions they're going to have to make, because the reason to bring this all back around, the Vikings were the second oldest team in the National Football League going into the year behind Miami.
Yeah.
They're not a bunch of young bucks. They kind of were looking to win as soon as possible.
Yeah, and you look at their list of pending free agents. Now, they're not all going to be gone. They're going to bring back some of those guys. But the guys that they are going to bring back are going to eat up most of their cap space. And then you have the quarterback decision to make on top of that.
There were some people losing their mind in inbox. Like, well, the Vikings have all this cap space. Yeah, because they have a bunch of unrestricted free agents coming up. That's why they got cap space.
That's why they have cap space.
And their quarterback made $10 million this year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's let's see where the cap space is when free agency gets underway and gets rolling here. So.
The dad's wallet's always fatter before the kid's asked to go to the arcade.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
Well, it's the Rams heading to Philadelphia. It's the Commanders heading to Detroit on the AFC side. Baltimore at Buffalo. That's going to be the last of the 4 games of divisional weekend. That's going to be a doozy. I actually just saw something, and gambling remains illegal at Bushwood. But the Buffalo Bills are a home playoff underdog for the first time in, I believe it's 18 or 19 home playoff games in their franchise's history. The Baltimore Ravens are actually favored on the road in Buffalo.
Bills Mafia is going to.
That's going to be a doozy of a game. I want to talk about it more on our next show. Obviously, Houston's going to Kansas City to face Patrick Mahomes, who hasn't thrown a pass since he opened a present on Christmas Day or something like that. I mean, it's been a while, but we'll see. We do have one more show before we're going to sign off for the season. We will record another show later this week, and then we will say goodbye for a portion of the off season. And when we come back, it will be this right here, what I'm about to talk about, because mark your calendars, folks. The 2025 NFL Draft is coming to Green Bay. Be among the thousands of football fans cheering on their team's picks by joining us April 24 through April 26 of 2025. Visit greenbay.com/draft25 for more information. And with that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of this season wrap-up week here on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.